Developing countries are generally countries that are seen as being less advanced in terms of technologies, while also having a lower human development index and a poorer quality of life. In addition to this, developing countries are seen as having developing economies, which means the per capita income level and diversity of exports is generally lower. As well, these countries cooperate less in global trade and the global economy. This general term indicates the bottom group of countries in terms of advancement, but can be further broken down into less developed country and least developed country to account for differences within this group. Generally speaking, these countries lack most of the amenities and resources that leads people to see certain countries as developed. Generally, birth rates are higher, people have a lower life expectancy, quality of life is lower, access to healthcare, education, electricity, and other amenities are significantly lower, and individual income is lower. As well, lifestyle in these countries tends to be different than most developed countries as there is a predominance of agriculture and a low level of urbanization. Rural population tends to be larger in these areas than urban population. A few of the countries that can be seen as developing are Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Democratic Republic of the Congo, Egypt, Haiti, India, Mexico, Qatar, Sudan, Uruguay, Vietnam, and Zimbabwe. A developing country is a sovereign state with a less developed industrial base and a lower Human Development Index, HDI, relative to other countries. However, this definition is not universally agreed upon. There is also no clear agreement on which countries fit this category. The terms low and middle income country, LMIC, and newly emerging economy, NE, are often used interchangeably but refers only to the economy of the countries. The World Bank classifies the world's economies into 4 groups, based on gross national income per capita: high, upper middle, lower middle, and low income countries. Least developed countries, landlocked developing countries, and small island developing states are all subgroupings of developing countries. Countries on the other end of the spectrum are usually referred to as high-income countries or developed countries. Developing countries tend to have some characteristics in common, often due to their histories or geographies. For example, they commonly have lower levels of access to safe drinking water, sanitation and hygiene, energy poverty, higher levels of pollution, e.g. air pollution, littering, water pollution, open defecation, higher proportions of people with tropical and infectious diseases, neglected tropical diseases, more road traffic accidents, and generally poorer quality infrastructure. In addition, there are also often high unemployment rates, widespread poverty, widespread hunger, extreme poverty, child labor, malnutrition, homelessness, substance abuse, prostitution, overpopulation, civil disorder, human capital flight, a large informal economy, high crime rates, extortion, robbery, burglary, murder, homicide, arms trafficking, sex trafficking, drug trafficking, kidnapping, rape, low education levels, economic inequality, school desertion, inadequate access to family planning services, teenage pregnancy, many informal settlements and slums, corruption at all government levels, and political instability. Unlike developed countries, developing countries lack rule of law. Access to healthcare is often low. People in developing countries usually have lower life expectancies than people in developed countries, reflecting both lower income levels and poorer public health. The burden of infectious diseases, maternal mortality, child mortality, and infant mortality are typically substantially higher in those countries. The effects of climate change are expected to impact developing countries more than high-income countries, as most of them have a high climate vulnerability or low climate resilience. Developing countries often have lower median ages than developed countries. Population aging is a global phenomenon, but population age has risen more slowly in developing countries. Development aid or development cooperation is financial aid given by foreign governments and other agencies to support developing countries' economic, environmental, social, and political development. If the Sustainable Development Goals which were set up by the United Nations for the year 2030 are achieved, they would overcome many of these problems. Bangladesh has consistently achieved an annual GDP growth rate that surpasses Pakistan's by approximately 2.5 percentage points each year. The fate of Pakistan's stability is increasingly intertwined with the trajectory of a deepening economic crisis. There are several terms used to classify countries into rough levels of development. Classification of any given country differs across sources, and sometimes, these classifications or the specific terminology used is considered disparaging. The World Bank classifies the world's economies into 4 groups, based on gross national income per capita calculated using the Atlas method, reset each year on July 1. Low-income countries. Lower middle-income countries. Upper middle-income countries. High-income countries, similar to developed countries. The 3 groups that are not high income are together referred to as low and middle income countries, LMICs. For example, for 2022 fiscal year, a low-income country is defined as one with a GNI per capita less than 1,045 in current US dollar. A lower middle-income country is one with GNI per capita between 1,046 to 4,095 in current US dollar. An upper middle-income country is one with GNI per capita between 4,096 to 12,695 in current US dollar, and a high-income country is one with GNI per capita of more than 12,696 in current US dollar. Historical thresholds are documented. Use of the term market instead of country usually indicates specific focus on the characteristics of the country's capital markets as opposed to the overall economy. Developed countries and developed markets. Developing countries include in decreasing order of economic growth or size of the capital market. Newly industrialized countries. Emerging markets. Frontier markets. Least developed countries, also called less economically developed country. Under other criteria, some countries are at an intermediate stage of development, or, as the International Monetary Fund, IMF, put it, following the fall of the Soviet Union, countries in transition, all those of Central and Eastern Europe, including Central European countries that still belong to the Eastern Europe group in the UN institutions, the former Soviet Union, USSR, countries in Central Asia, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and Turkmenistan, and Mongolia. By 2009, the IMF's World Economic Outlook classified countries as advanced, emerging, or developing, depending on 1. Per capita income level, 2. Export diversification. So oil exporters that have high per capita GDP would not make the advanced classification because around 70% of its exports are oil, and 3. Degree of integration into the global financial system. Developing countries can also be categorized by geography. Small island developing states, a group of developing countries that are small island countries which tend to share similar sustainable development challenges, small but growing populations, limited resources, remoteness, susceptibility to natural disasters, vulnerability to external shocks, excessive dependence on international trade, and fragile environments. Landlocked developing countries. Landlocked countries often experience economic and other disadvantages. Heavily indebted poor countries, a definition by a program of the IMF and World Bank. Transition economy, moving from a centrally planned to market-driven economy. Multidimensional clustering system, with the understanding that different countries have different development priorities and levels of access to resources and institutional capacities, and to offer a more nuanced understanding of developing countries and their characteristics. Scholars have categorized them into 5 distinct groups based on factors such as levels of poverty and inequality, productivity and innovation, political constraints and dependence on external flows. In general, the WTO accepts any country's claim of itself being developing. Certain countries that have become developed in the last 20 years by almost all economic metrics, still insist to be classified as developing country, as it entitles them to a preferential treatment at the WTO, countries such as Brunei, Hong Kong, Kuwait, Macau, Qatar, Singapore, and the United Arab Emirates have been cited and criticized for this self-declared status. Development can be measured by economic or human factors. Developing countries are, in general, countries that have not achieved a significant degree of industrialization relative to their populations, and have, in most cases, a medium to low standard of living. There is an association between low income and high population growth. The development of a country is measured with statistical indices such as income per capita, per person, gross domestic product per capita, life expectancy, the rate of literacy, freedom index, and others. The UN has developed the Human Development Index, HDI, a compound indicator of some of the above statistics, to gauge the level of human development for countries where data is available. The UN had set Millennium Development Goals from a blueprint developed by all of the world's countries and leading development institutions, in order to evaluate growth. These goals ended in 2015, to be superseded by the Sustainable Development Goals. The concept of the developing nation is found, under one term or another, in numerous theoretical systems having diverse orientations, for example, theories of decolonization, liberation theology, Marxism, anti-imperialism, modernization, social change and political economy. Another important indicator is the sectoral changes that have occurred since the stage of development of the country. On an average, countries with a 50% contribution from the secondary sector, manufacturing, have grown substantially. Similarly, countries with a tertiary sector stronghold also see a greater rate of economic development. While the Western world has achieved historically unique levels of wealth, 80% of the world's population lives in developing countries. These developing nations have less sophisticated economies, with the majority of people employed in agriculture. Compared to the developed world, people in these countries have much lower incomes. More importantly, they lack access to legal institutions and property rights, trapping them in cycles of poverty and oppression. It can be easy to suppose that wealth, mostly functional legal systems, and general stability are the norm. Nothing could be farther from the truth. Both historically and today, most people have lived in conditions of scarcity, struggling to make it through the winter. Governments have, on the whole, been engines of oppression and resource extraction. This norm is evident in the characteristics of developing countries today. The definition of a developing, or developed, country is not always clear. Although the United Nations determines which countries are among the least developed countries, it has not itself adopted criteria for developing countries. Nevertheless, with the Human Development Index, they provide an important underlying value. This index combines the framework conditions of daily life such as nutrition, medical care, education, and income into a comparable index. Probably the most widespread interpretation of the term developing country is that of the International Monetary Fund, IMF. Here, states are classified on the basis of three criteria: average per capita income, diversification of export goods. Some countries export a lot, but only a few different products. In some Gulf states in particular, well over half of all exports consist of crude oil products. If a country's economy is based on only one industrial sector, this is not a stable situation, according to the International Monetary Fund. Degree of participation in the international financial system. A further classification, which is occasionally equated with a developing country, was created by the World Bank with a pure classification according to average annual income. These are the levels. Income below $995, low-income countries. Income below $3,895, lower middle-income countries. Income below $12,055, upper middle-income countries. Income above $12,056, high-income countries. Colloquially, developing countries are also referred to as third-world countries, especially in wealthy industrialized nations. In the countries concerned themselves, This classification is often considered defamatory. The content of this designation is also controversial, since the model of the three worlds was originally used to express political affiliation after the Cold War. The first world is represented by the NATO states, the second world includes the Eastern Bloc states, and the third world includes all other states from a political point of view. Developing countries refer to countries or economies with a per capita income that is lower than that of the developed world. But, we should keep in mind that there is a great amount of variation in income levels among the countries that are in this camp. A nation is typically considered to still be developing if it does not meet the socio-economic criteria listed above. Simply put, these are most often countries with a lower income, an underdeveloped industrial base, a lower standard of living, and a lack of access to modern technology loci. As a result, developing nations frequently experience a lack of jobs, food, clean drinking water, education, healthcare, and housing. According to the UN, in 2023, 126 countries were considered developing. All developing countries were located in either Africa, Asia, or Latin America and the Caribbean. Thank you for watching this video.